Hello and welcome to my shop. Today I'm going to be building another door. I have made a couple, 2 or 3 videos on building barn doors. This one's going to be a 4-panel door, but it's going to be barn door style. It's going to be on rails for a closet in our house. I'm going to be using some 4/4 and 8/4 hard maple for this project. This is rough sawn lumber, and I have a few knots to fix before starting the milling process. To do this, I will be using some epoxy and some black micro powder to color the epoxy. Now these doors are going to be painted, and normally I wouldn't tint the epoxy just to paint over, but I'm going to do it here just in case plans change. You never know. This is a deep penetrating epoxy from Total Boat, specifically made for fixing and stabilizing knot holes, cracks, and so on. After several minutes of stirring, I just use my stir stick to dab the epoxy into the knots, allowing it to seep into and fill each to the top. To make sure I avoid any checking, I will trim the end back just a little bit with a circular saw. And I do see just a little bit right here. So I'll cut a little bit more back, just about 1/4 of an inch at a time, and I'll continue this until the checking is gone. Next, I'll measure and lay out for my stiles and rails. The 2 stiles are cut out of the same piece, so I'll start out with a circular saw breaking it down. I get some binding on the blade, so I'll slide another piece of scrap material under one end, and that gives the blade a little something that it needs. The miter saw took care of the rest. At the joiner, I will make one edge straight on each rail and stile. This gives me a good reference for the table saw fence when ripping these down. Oversized, of course. Now these boards are not flat, so to minimize any chance of binding or kickback, I will make 2 passes, cutting about halfway through with the first pass. My final width will be 4 inches, so until I do my final joining and planing, these are getting cut at 4.5. Then back to the joiner to joint one face and one edge. I'll also mark the unjointed edge with a pencil mark. This helps me keep up with what side has not been done. Then with the jointed face down, all the boards are planed to thickness. Oh, and if you can see what is wrong with this section of video, leave me a comment below pointing that out. Let's see who all can catch it. Back at the miter saw, I'll cut the 2 stiles to their final length. And at the table saw, I'll use the miter sled to cut the rails to length. I'll do this by keeping my jointed edge against the fence, square up one end, then flip the piece end over end using the positive stop for repeated cuts and cut to length. You can see here the pencil mark letting me know which edges still need attention. And I'll give that edge the attention it needs at the table saw. Using a feather board, I'll cut it down to its final measurement, which is 4 inches. Using a 3/8 inch slot bit at the router table, I'll take each piece one at a time to the router and cut the slot to receive the panels. Each stile and the top and bottom rails will get one slot only. For this door, the 3 middle rails will get a slot on each edge. For me, I've discovered it's best to take the pieces one at a time to the router table, always making sure I turn the same side down when cutting these slots. If there is any variation in the height of the bit versus the center of the workpiece, it takes that variation out of it, and I'll mark the back side with a piece of tape. I will cut a 3/8 tongue on the end of each rail, and I'll do this at the router table using a rabbiting bit. I'll make a cut on each side and each end, and keep raising the bit a little each time until there's only 3/8 inch of material left. And since this is cutting across end grain, I'll use a wooden scrap as a push block to prevent any blowout. Then that tongue will fit into the slots of the stiles. Depending upon what your taste is, but if you're going to make a panel door, more than likely you're going to want these panels to be an even size through and through, which comes to doing a little bit of math in order to find out the placement of each one of these rails that's inside this door. And the way that I do that is real simple. It don't require a lot of math or a lot of figuring into it. Get the total length of your stiles. And this one just happens to be 78 1/2 inches long. Both of these are the same length. So we're going to take 78.5, which is the length of our stiles, divide that by 2, equals 39.25, which is 39 1/4 inches. And that 39 1/4 will be center of these stiles. I'm going to put blue tape on it so I'm not having to mark up my wood. And I'm going to put that close to the edge. And I'm going to put another piece on this rail. And then that way I can mark center on it, which all this material is 4 inches wide, whether it's the rail or the stile, it's all 4 inches wide and 1.5 inches thick. And I just pull out my tape, line this up on 39 1/4, which is what half the distance is. Then I'm going to mark it. And you can check it just to make sure, if you want, just by pulling it the other way, and make sure that your mark is at 39 1/4 and this one is. And I'm also going to put a piece of tape across the end of this rail, and I'm going to mark it at 2 inches. I probably want to get this back so it don't interfere with my reference. I just want to move that till I line these 2 marks up. The center mark of the rail with center of the stile. I put a piece of tape on the end of it and I mark it on center at 2 inches. And then instead of going on the outside, go to the inside and to the inside of this one. You're going in between the top one or bottom one, whichever way your door is laying. You're going in between that one and this one. And this one is 33 1/4, which is 16 5/8. So I'll come down here and I measure 16 5/8. I put a mark on the tape and put a mark on center of this board, and then I line those up. And that gives me, because I know this rail is 4 inches wide, I've got 2 inches above this mark and I've got 2 inches below. So if this is 16 5/8, that should be 14 5/8 to the top of that rail, which it is. And it should be the same thing from the top of this one to the bottom of this one. And it is 14 5/8. And do the exact same thing down there, and you can make all of your panels the same size. Work off center, I guess, is a better way to put it. It's a lot easier. Now it's time to break down this small cup and mark the other stile. All you need to do is line that stile up with the first one And I like to put a clamp or so on it to hold them together. That way they don't move, and then just transfer that mark over. Then we know that they both are marked the same. I'll also mark center on the other end of each rail. And then to reassemble the pieces again to measure for the panels. I find it's best to put a few clamps on it just to hold everything together where it needs to be. Alright, to get the size of your panel, get your distance, which this one is exactly 24 inches wide from the inside to inside. And I've got 3/8 of an inch groove here and 3/8 of an inch groove there. I've got to add that to it. So 24 3/4 is the actual width of my panel. This one is 14 5/8, so if I add 3/4, it's going to be 15 3/8. And I've got 4 of those to make and cut out. These boards are wide, so I'll line them up in rough cut to length with a track saw. And again, I'm cutting slightly oversized. I will have to mill and glue up panels. I'll skid plane to thickness. Joint one edge. And cut to width at the table saw. Next, I'll do a little matching. Even though these are going to be painted, you just never know when plans are going to change. Once I have them like I want, I fold them together just like closing a book and joint the two pieces together. This gives me a perfect seam for gluing, and each panel gets the same treatment. Now it's time to permanently join these two together in the bonds of Titebond 3. I'll apply pressure with the bottom clamps, cover the edge of each seam with a clamp, deter any type of slippage with a mallet, and then place a couple of clamps across the top to counter the pressure of the bottom clamps. After about 30 minutes, the squeeze out has skimmed over. I'll clean this up with a scraper, and I'll do the same to the bottom side. Then everything is cleaned up by sanding, first with 120 and then 180 grit. Now to cut these down to their final size. I'll start by joining one edge of each panel, and I'll do this to the edge which will allow me to cut away any imperfections later, like this knot hole. Once one edge is jointed, I'll move over to the table saw. With that jointed edge to the fence, I'll cut to the final width and remove any unwanted blemishes. I'll cut to length with the sled, squaring up one end, and using the positive stop, I'll cut to length. Using the same rabbiting bit as before, I'll lower it, and just like those tongues on the rails, I'll start with the end grain and work all the way around to both sides of the panel until I have a 3/8 inch tongue to match the slots of the door frames. Three more and I'll have a door. To glue this up, I'll be using epoxy. There's 5 rails and 4 panels to line up with each style, and using epoxy will give me that extra time needed, and it won't swell the wood, making the joints much harder or difficult. So with all the clamps laid out and ready to go, I'll apply the epoxy and then clamp together and use a mallet to line up the rails to the ends of each style. Once I'm good on one side, it's time to do the other. I'll remove the clamps, tear it apart, apply epoxy, and clamp everything back up. Tap tap here and bang bang there, and add more clamps across the top. About 24 hours later, the clamps are removed and the rails and stiles are sanded up to 180 grit. The outside of each rail, front and back, receives round over, and then the whole door is cleaned up. Now to prepare to paint. I want to elevate the door off the work surface. I've sanded everything up to 180 grit, and now it's time to paint. And I'm going to be painting this by hand with a high gloss white paint. And of course I'll go in the direction of the grain of the wood as I'm brushing it on there, but it's going to all be hand brushed. Well, let me cover one other thing before I cover this up with paint. I opted not to put dowels in this one. And the reason being is it's going to be a sliding barn door on a closet. Of course, this is a panel door, but that's the style it's going to be. And I really don't feel that it's needed. I put this together, of course, with epoxy. But the hardware is going to hang on these two stiles, which that's going to hold this whole stile up on each side. And all the glue joints has to do is this one here will have to hold up that panel. This one will have to hold up that panel. This one, and this one, and so on. And I think the glue joints alone is enough to compensate for the weight of that panel. So I think each glue joint on each panel will be more than sufficient to hold up, or each glue joint on each rail is more than efficient to hold up each panel. Since the initial plan to paint did not change, management wants a high gloss white and brush stroke look. So as any good employee, you do what you're told. And here's a tip for you for when you're doing brush painting. For those corners where large amounts of paint usually build up, use a Q-tip to remove it and even the paint out. And no, I'm not going to show the painting of this whole door, but here it is hung. That will do it for this one. Please give the video a thumbs up and hit that subscribe button if you haven't already. And until next time, thanks for watching.